Well, good afternoon or good morning, as the case may be, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar on the latest ICCS flagship study, Taking Care of Business 4. My name is Nicholas Verhotko. I'm the Research Director at the ICCS and pleased to be moderating this session with you today. The format today will center on a presentation of the results of Taking Care of Business 4, lasting approximately 40 minutes, followed by 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. Please submit any questions you have during the course of the presentation using the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of these as we can in the allotted time. The Taking Care of Business 4 study was conducted by Malatest Associates on behalf of the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service. And it's my pleasure to now introduce today's two presenters from Malatest Associates, Bess Ashby, the project study lead, and her colleague, Nova Saeed, a key project team member. Bess and Nova, over to you.
Thank you, Nicholas. So our agenda for today, I will take you through the background and methodology of Taking Care of Business 4, and then I'll turn it over to Bess for the perceptions of government, CSAT index and drivers, and specific action areas. Then I will discuss the self-service options and red tape and regulatory issues before turning it over to Bess again to discuss the executive summary. Taking Care of Business is modeled on the Citizens First series of research to capture perceptions and satisfaction with government services for businesses. It's administered every 3 years, and this is the fourth wave of the study. So we call it Taking Care of Business 4 or TCOB4. The research objectives are similar to previous waves, the primary one being to highlight what's working well, determine what drives satisfaction, and identify priorities for improvement. This wave, two major analytical enhancements were employed. First being a new client satisfaction model developed by the ICCS to gain a more nuanced understanding of service-to-business issues. This framework introduced a multidimensional outcome measure for assessing the recent service experience. And the second being quadrant analysis to identify each aspect of service experience as an area to improve, protect, maintain, or monitor. We also explored new areas of interest, including self-service options, in particular opportunities for moving towards the online channel, and regulatory issues, particularly favored approaches for reducing red tape. The survey response for TCOB4, we spoke to over 4,300 businesses across Canada. Our response rate was around 12.6%, which is slightly below TCOB3. This lower response reflects a growing challenge of fielding surveys with business respondents. However, we did employ some response rate enhancement techniques, including a pre-survey authorization letter, the option to complete the survey online, and a shorter survey since the last wave. This year, we had 11 partner jurisdictions join us, 2 more than TCOB3. In terms of reporting, we weighted the results by business size and jurisdiction to match the actual distribution of businesses across Canada. Average scores were converted from a 5-point scale to a score out of 100 as per the ICCS common approach. And we took a valid sample approach, which refers to the exclusion of respondents who did not provide an answer or provided a no answer response. Finally, we also include best in class scores, which is the highest score among all partner jurisdictions for comparing against the national average. One of the analytical enhancements in TCOB4 is the ICCS client satisfaction model. This is a new analytical framework that reflects both the client's personal experience and the broad cultural environment in which the service is delivered. The personal experience is the side of service delivery that is most directly under the control of service providers. It includes service attributes reflecting the technical or mechanical aspects of service delivery, as well as the strength of the emotional engagement in the service experience. The societal context reflects broader concepts of organizational excellence, including the comparative context and the reputational context. So how is this new analytical framework used? Previous waves of taking care of business measured client satisfaction using a single item. Overall, I was satisfied with the service I received. The new analytical framework described here serves as the basis for a multidimensional outcome measure. This is a 7-measure composite score known as the Client Satisfaction Index, or CSI. All respondents were asked these 7 questions in thinking about their recent experience in an overall sense. The 7 items included in the CSI start with overall satisfaction, then includes confidence in public service, trust and confidence. 2 reputational measures, which are summed up by the question, would the client speak positively to others about their service experience? Did the service exceed their expectations? Then we have the comparative measure, assessed by the question, was the service experience the best offered anywhere? Then we have the emotional dimension, summed up by the question, how good did you feel about the service experience? And finally, the functional dimension, assessed by the question, how easy was it to get the service? Now I'll turn it over to Bess, who will take you through the perceptions of government.
Thank you, Nova. Thank you, Nova. To learn how businesses feel about government service generally, businesses responding to the Taking Care of Business 4 survey were asked to think about their business's dealings with all levels of government. So that's municipal, regional, provincial or territorial, and federal. And they were asked to rate the overall quality of service they received from each level of government. These ratings can be considered a proxy for service reputation. As shown in the table at left of this slide, satisfaction with services provided by all levels of government are stable to slightly improved relative to the prior period of tracking. Service reputation scores for the federal and provincial government have improved by roughly 2 points since 2010, and the average score for municipal governments has remained stable. It should be noted that service reputation ratings are not just impacted by the service experience itself. Factors that are beyond the direct control of service managers, so things like the state of the economy and political issues and events, also come into play. Service reputation scores can take a long time to register change, in part because of these external factors. So these slight positive movements we're seeing here in the satisfaction ratings for each level of government should be interpreted as indicating that government efforts to improve perceptions of public sector services are working. The table on the right-hand side of this slide shows businesses' perceptions of government in terms of conducting business in an open and accountable manner, providing easy access to information and services, and contributing to a level playing field for businesses in the same industry or sector. As shown in this table, businesses' impressions are stable to improved since 2010, particularly in terms of being seen as contributing to a level playing field for businesses in my industry or sector. The score on this measure has increased significantly from 44 to 47 in the current period. However, the majority of businesses still do not feel that they get good value for their tax dollars or that governments are open and accountable. Average scores for these attributes are below 50, suggesting there's still significant room for improvement. The next slide shows satisfaction with a recent specific service interaction. Businesses were asked to recall a recent service interaction that took place in the past 6 months. The line graph at left shows businesses' overall satisfaction with this most recent interaction. As shown, satisfaction at 63 is trending stable relative to 2010 when the score was 64, and it's marginally improved relative to 2007 when satisfaction was at 60. Levels of satisfaction are broken out by specific service types in the table at right. As shown in this table, levels of satisfaction are highest among businesses accessing a service related to health and safety and human resources. Services in the legal and environmental categories are among the weakest performers. Compared to 2010, satisfaction scores are trending relatively stable for most services, with one exception. Satisfaction with services related to property, plant, and equipment has slipped significantly by 7 points. In 2010, this service ranked among the top 3 performers, but in the current period, it ranks last. This decline is due primarily to weaker performance on the aspects of the service experience that drive client satisfaction. And we'll explore this in more detail in the next sections. As Nova mentioned earlier, the satisfaction index is comprised of 7 measures. These 7 measures are listed on this slide. The performance rating for each measure is listed in the column at the far left of the slide. Scores across the measures range from a low of 50 for the service experience exceeded my expectations to a high of 65 where I felt good about the experience and receiving the service was easy. Tracking is available for just 2 of these measures. These are, overall, I was satisfied with the service I received, and the service experience exceeded my expectations. In terms of performance on these 2 measures compared to 2010, overall satisfaction is trending stable, but the service exceeding my expectations has dropped significantly. This decline was observed for most jurisdictions. When the 2013 performance ratings across the 7 measures that comprise the index are combined into a single composite measure, they generate a client satisfaction index of 59. There was some variation by jurisdiction in the overall client satisfaction index. Scores by jurisdiction ranged from the mid-50s to a high of 61. The client satisfaction index is the score that government agencies are looking to increase moving forward. So how can this be accomplished? For this, we look to our client satisfaction drivers, which are shown on the next page. The drivers of client satisfaction are listed on this slide. They include issue resolution, which explores how problems and complaints are addressed. Delivery timeliness, which refers to the amount of time it takes to get access to and to receive a government service. Service design, which explores the actual process of getting the service. Things like, do businesses know how to get the information they need? Do they feel like their confidentiality is protected? And so on. Staff interaction, which explores how businesses felt about their interactions with staff. Were they friendly? Were they courteous? And so on. And finally, channel satisfaction, which explores the service experience in the context of the primary method of service delivery. I should note here that this model of client satisfaction includes drivers that explain 86% of the variance in client satisfaction overall. So this is quite a strong model. 2013 performance ratings across these drivers of satisfaction are listed along the bottom of the slide. As shown, scores are highest for staff interaction at 73 and channel satisfaction at 71. They're lowest for issue resolution and delivery timeliness, both at 64. Each of these drivers can be thought of as a lever, which generates a greater or lesser degree of lift in our overall client satisfaction index. So, which of these levers will generate the most lift in the client satisfaction index overall? To see this, we will move on to the next slide. The degree to which each driver of satisfaction will generate lift in the client satisfaction index is indicated by the beta values listed along the bottom of this slide. The highest beta values are observed for issue resolution and delivery timeliness. This means that increasing satisfaction with these drivers will generate the greatest amount of lift in the client satisfaction index. Conversely, the lowest beta values are observed for channel satisfaction and staff interaction. This means that these services have less, or these service areas have less relative impact on the overall client satisfaction index. It should be noted here that the drivers that have the least amount of impact on the client satisfaction index, that is channel satisfaction and staff interaction, currently receive the highest satisfaction ratings. Issue resolution and delivery timeliness which have the greatest relative impact on the overall client satisfaction index, are currently receiving the lowest satisfaction ratings. I'm sorry here, my volume is fading in and out. I apologize. Let me see if I can adjust this a bit. This is the reverse of the relationship we hope to see with this type of analysis. Ideally, we want to see a match between the service experience categories that receive the highest satisfaction ratings and the service experience categories that have the most impact on client satisfaction. The rank order of the impact scores shown on this slide was consistent for most jurisdictions, all but 3. In other words, for most jurisdictions, issue resolution and delivery timeliness have the most impact on client satisfaction, and channel satisfaction and staff interaction have the least impact on client satisfaction. The chart on the next slide shows a bit more clearly the relationship between the performance and importance scores for each aspect of the service experience. Each aspect of the client service experience is plotted on this quadrant chart. The impact score for each service area is plotted along the vertical or y-axis, and the performance rating for each service area is plotted along the horizontal or x-axis. Service areas that appear in the upper right quadrant of the chart represent areas of strength. In other words, these service areas have strong relative impact on client satisfaction and high performance ratings relative to other areas. One service area appears in this quadrant, that is service design. Therefore, due to its high impact on client satisfaction and its relatively high performance rating, service design represents an area to protect moving forward. Service areas that appear in the upper left quadrant represent key areas to improve. In other words, these areas have a high relative impact on client satisfaction, but lower performance ratings relative to other service areas. What appears in this quadrant? We have issue resolution and delivery timeliness. In other words, issue resolution and delivery timeliness represent areas that require improvement in order to increase client satisfaction moving forward. Service areas that appear below the horizontal line, staff interaction and channel satisfaction, have a relatively weaker impact on client satisfaction overall. This doesn't mean that these areas are unimportant. Rather, that limited resources, if they are to be used to best effect, should be allocated to making improvements in the service areas that appear in the upper left quadrant and to maintaining current strengths in the service areas that appear in the upper right quadrant. In the next section, we'll be focusing only on the service areas that appear above the horizontal line, as these are most critical to increasing client satisfaction moving forward. Again, these are issue resolution, delivery timeliness, and service design. Issue resolution is identified as priority number 1, as it has the most impact on client satisfaction and currently generates a lower performance rating relative to other service areas. Again, the performance rating for this index is 64, which compares to 73 for staff interaction and 71 for channel satisfaction. The issue resolution index is comprised of 3 measures, which are shown on this slide. Performance ratings for each of these measures are listed again in the column at the far left of the slide. As shown here, the performance ratings in the current period are fairly tightly clustered, ranging from a low of 61 to a high of 65. Trending is available for just one measure, which is any issues I encountered if the service process were easily resolved. As shown here, the performance score for this measure has declined significantly relative to 2010. So which aspect of issue resolution has the most impact on client satisfaction overall? To see this, we will move on to our next slide. The aspect of issue resolution that has the most impact on client satisfaction is having confidence that any future issues will be addressed to my satisfaction. This aspect of issue resolution is identified as an area to protect, as its impact on client satisfaction is high and its performance rating is also high relative to other aspects of issue resolution. Moving forward, efforts should be made to maintain current strengths in this area. In the upper left quadrant of the chart is the attribute, any issues I encountered in the service process were easily resolved. This aspect of issue resolution also represents a strong driver of client satisfaction, but it is an area where performance ratings are currently relatively low. Moving forward, government agencies should focus on identifying the barriers to easy resolution of problems with the that clients experience during the service process. It should be noted that these two areas, having confidence that any future issues will be addressed to my satisfaction, and any issues I encountered in the service process were easily resolved, were the top two drivers of client satisfaction for virtually all jurisdictions. Moving to delivery timeliness, the second most impactful in terms of driving overall client satisfaction. Again, this refers to the amount of time it takes to get access to and receive a government service. The overall score for this index is 64. So along with issue resolution, it has the weakest performance rating relative to the other drivers of satisfaction. The delivery timeliness index is comprised of three measures, which are shown on this slide. Again, performance ratings for each of these measures are listed in the column at the far left of the slide. Note that the performance ratings across the three aspects of delivery timeliness are very tightly clustered. So they range from a low of 63 to a high of 64. Trending is available for just one measure, which is I was satisfied with the amount of time it took to receive the service. As shown here, the performance score for this measure has increased significantly relative to 2010. On the next slide, we'll take a look at the relative impact of each of these delivery timeliness measures on client satisfaction overall. The strongest driver of satisfaction among the measures that comprise the delivery timeliness index is the attribute, I was satisfied with the time it took to get any help I needed. However, although this is the strongest driver of satisfaction, it also represents an area of relatively weak performance. Therefore, moving forward, efforts should be made to better understand the barriers that exist to providing clients with the help they need in a timely manner. Underscoring the importance of this service area is the fact that this represents an area to improve for virtually all jurisdictions. Service design, the final area of the client service experience we'll look at in detail. As mentioned earlier, service design refers to the actual process of getting the service. The specific aspects that comprise the service design index are listed on this slide. So things like, did getting this service place an unreasonable burden on my business? Did I know how to get the information I needed? And so on. The overall score for this index is 70. Performance ratings across the various aspects of service design range from a low of 66, receiving the service was easy and getting this service didn't place an unreasonable burden on my business, to a high of 76, or I'm confident my business information was protected. Trending is available for a few measures here, but I'd like to highlight just a couple of the changes that we're seeing. The score for knowing where or how to find the service was the lowest in 2010, and we note that it has increased significantly this wave. There is one significant decline shown on this slide, and that is for, in the end, I received the service I was seeking. However, it should be noted that the average score for this attribute, despite the decline, remains high compared to most other measures. As this quadrant chart shows, government agencies are performing well in terms of getting clients the information they need to receive the service they seek and ensuring that they actually do receive the service they need in the end. However, agencies need to work towards making improvements in the area of reducing the burden businesses experience as they attempt to get the service they need. While there is some variation in these results by jurisdiction, for the most part, most jurisdictions are experiencing issues related to ease of accessing and receiving services and the burden this places on businesses. I'll now pass the presentation over to Nova so she can talk about some of the possible ways of simplifying the service delivery process through self-service options and red tape reduction. And Nova, just please watch your volume is high.
Okay, thank you, Bess. Self-service is one of the two new areas addressed in TCOB4, based on the growing interest in the online channel, shown on this slide. Businesses were asked which method of accessing a recent government service was the principal or primary one used. They were also asked what channel they would prefer to use if they were to access the same service again. Similar to 2010, the top two channels used as the primary method continue to be telephone and government websites. Over the past 3 years, the gap between online and telephone preference has closed considerably. In 2010, 44% of businesses used telephone as the primary channel and 14% used web. Just 26% said that they would prefer to use the online channel. In 2013, 35% of businesses used telephone as their primary channel and 31% used web. 36% said that they would prefer to use the online channel in 2013. Results from the previous slide indicated that as the online channel matures, businesses view government websites as more than just an entry point into service delivery. On the right, we have average scores indicating levels of agreement to the following questions. As shown here, an increasing number of respondents report that they can now access all routine government services on the Internet. The proportion of businesses that would like to be able to access all routine government services via the Internet has also increased dramatically over the past 3 years. In the next slide, we'll dive deeper into online interest. Respondents who said that they would prefer to use electronic channels to access services were asked if their business would benefit if e-services were accessible from a variety of devices, for example, PC, tablet, and phone. And they were also asked whether they would prefer to use new and emerging technologies. As shown here, interest is quite high. Furthermore, all respondents were asked if their business would accept using the online channel for all government services if that was the only option. At the total level, the average score for this question was 62. When we look at this question through the lens of channel preference, those who preferred electronic channels indicated a much higher likelihood of accepting the online option than those who preferred telephone. So what is the best way to encourage the adoption of self-service practices? All respondents were asked how effective various incentives would be for accessing government services online. The highest levels of agreement were noted for the incentives listed on this slide and include providing a way to connect to a live person while online, providing a rebate or reduced cost to users of online services, having staff walk you through the use of online services, knowing that getting the service online involves fewer steps than other methods, and having the service available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Providing a way to connect to a live person and reduce costs continue to pique the greatest interest for virtually all jurisdictions. Among those who prefer accessing services online, interest was strong for all 5 incentives shown here. Among those who prefer the telephone channel, interest in having access to a live person and having staff walk you through was quite a bit higher than interest in other options. In order to stay current with the evolving service environment, TCOB4 also explored red tape and regulatory issues. Businesses were asked if the number of regulatory requirements experienced by their business is reasonable. At the national level, roughly half agreed that it is reasonable. However, across all jurisdictions, more than 2 out of 5 of respondents indicated that the regulatory burden experienced by their business has increased over the past 3 years. The impact of increased regulatory burden on client satisfaction is clear. As shown on the chart on the right, the client satisfaction score was much lower among those who said that red tape burden had increased in comparison to those reporting that it had stayed the same or decreased. So what can be done? We explored 6 strategies. We assessed 6 strategies for efficacy in reducing regulatory burden. Interestingly, having fewer policies and regulations was not necessarily the most favored approach in reducing red tape. Establishing standards on the administration of regulatory services, for example, being notified when all documentation is required for a service has been received, or knowing how long it would take to receive a license, was considered the most effective at the national level. This was followed by having just one government identity card or number to access any service. Results were consistent across most jurisdictions, although the latter option generated as much interest as the former in some jurisdictions. Interest was weakest for my business would be willing to pay a convenience fee to skip the line and get a government service or product more quickly. And this result was consistent across all jurisdictions. Now I'll turn it over to Beth, who will take you through the executive summary.
Thank you, Nova. Overall, what did we learn from the Taking Care of Business 4 study? In brief, we have identified 5 key lessons learned. First, that businesses' perceptions of government are moving in the right direction. They have improved slightly overall. We are seeing a slight increase in both general impressions of government and in levels of satisfaction with the services businesses most recently received from government. Second, we learned that to continue to improve the service experience, government agencies should focus on improving business clients' experiences with respect to issue resolution and delivery timeliness. In terms of issue resolution, the primary area to improve moving forward is making it easier to resolve any issues encountered during the service experience. In terms of delivery timeliness, the primary area to improve relates to reducing the amount of time it takes to get clients the help they need. Third, results of Taking Care of Business 4 suggest that while businesses are generally successful in getting the services they seek, they think the process of getting the service could be simplified in order to reduce the burden they experience. Fourth, we learned that one method of simplifying the service access and delivery experience might be through promotion of self-service options. Specifically, promotion of self-service options should include emphasizing that staff are available to assist with the online experience as needed, offering rebates or reduced costs if this is considered an appropriate option. Noting that services are available 24/7 using self-service options, and self-service options generally involve fewer steps to get the service. Finally, we learned that to reduce the regulatory burden experienced by businesses, government should consider establishing standards on the administration of regulatory services. So things like notifying businesses when they've completed all the required documentation and creating one ID card or number to access any service. This concludes our presentation, so we'd now like to pass the presentation back to the ICCS so we can address any questions you might have.
Well, thank you, Beth and Nova, for that informative and well done presentation. Just a reminder to participants that if you have any questions that have occurred to you during the course of the presentation or now as you sort of reflect on what you heard, you can send your questions along to us through the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. So we do have one question that's come in, Bess and Nova, that you could please address. And I think there are actually two parts to this question, and I'll read it for you. So from this presentation, it seems that taking care of business uses trust and confidence interchangeably, or at least it lumps them together. As these are not the same thing, I wonder if my impression is off the mark and whether we actually do distinguish between trust and confidence. And how does satisfaction contribute to either of these? Sorry, that's the second question. It's a single question. I'll get back to the first one that has two components in a bit.
So we haven't parsed out in our survey sort of a different definition for trust versus confidence, although we do recognize your point or appreciate your point that they can be considered two separate concepts. In terms of measuring the two, trust and confidence in government, I'm just trying to find a specific spot in our survey. Nova, maybe you can help me out here.
Certainly, Beth. The actual wording of the question was, the service I experienced increased my confidence in public service. So trust and confidence shown on an earlier slide for the client satisfaction framework was more of a concept, whereas the actual question was talking more about confidence.
So hopefully you were able to hear that, and I apologize for any audio difficulties. We've got a couple more questions here, and maybe one sort of leads into the others, and perhaps I can comment on it. So I'll do them together. So the one question is, can you elaborate more on the, again, I've got questions popping in here. I have a question about the drivers. This is a question. I believe that they have changed since the last year. Is that correct? Bess did address the new model, the client satisfaction analytical framework and index approach that's being used. I would say that the drivers have not so much changed as elaborated. So we've come to understand that there are multiple dimensions to the issue of timeliness, and so it's no longer a single question reflecting timeliness, but timeliness to access, timeliness to complete the survey experience, timeliness to receive any assistance required. Similarly, we know, for example, over the course of iterations of Citizens First and taking care of business, that dimensions of the staff interaction with the clients has many more dimensions to it. So being knowledgeable and competent, acting with courtesy, treating people fairly. These are all dimensions of one single overarching driver. So essentially, the drivers have been taken and rounded out to drill down to different dimensions or aspects of that driver. And that's allowing us to more finely slice and understand the subtleties of how drivers interact. And I think, as Bess and Nova alluded in their presentation, the value of this analytical framework shows itself in the differentiations that emerge in the results of different jurisdictions. So they have specific and particular issues that we're able to put our finger on as a result of this more robust model. So I'll come back, and you can also comment on that, Bess and Nova, but I'll come back to the initial question, which is related to this, I think, and it says, could you speak on how the drivers of the CSAT index, and I think it's actually not intended to be drivers in this question, but the component questions of the CSAT index map to the drivers of satisfaction. Is there a one-to-one relationship intended? In other words, are the drivers directly connected to the components of the CSAT index? And if so, are they, in a sense, designed to distinguish between outputs and outcomes? I hope that's clear.
I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that question correctly or not, but if I am, I mean, the measures within the dependent variable or the CSAT index itself are intended to represent the complexity of client satisfaction. Each, I think, as you were saying, Nicholas, it's intended to fully explain customer satisfaction or client satisfaction rather than trying to express it through a single measure. The drivers relating to each one-to-one, no, they don't operate one-to-one in that way. I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question, to be perfectly honest. I mean, the composite of the CSAT index is the dependent variable. And we're looking at the relationship between each of the drivers individually and that complete composite. So there's no weighting going on with any of the individual measures within the composite. They each have their equal weight, but maybe I'm not understanding exactly what you're asking.
Well, perhaps I think you've got a good part of that issue captured in your response, Bess. I'll add to that I would say yes, the CSAT index is the outcome. This is what we're hoping to achieve. We want all of those dimensions of client satisfaction to be at full operational capacity. So we want it to be easy. We want it to be timely. We want it to enhance the reputation of the organization and reflect well on it. So that is an outcome, and the drivers are the causes in terms of cause and effect. So they are what levers or enhances the level of client satisfaction. The components of the drivers are not mapped back to the individual drivers themselves, but they're actually mapped back to the level of client satisfaction itself. So they're tracked back to their independent and individual impact on client satisfaction. So they operate each as individual levers, but we capture them in buckets that represent those drivers. I hope that helps. Unless you want to add something more on that, Bess and Nova, maybe I'll proceed to the next question.
That's fine.
The question is, can you elaborate more on the difference between being satisfied with the time it took to get the help I needed as opposed to the time it took to receive the service?
So the time it took to get the help I needed refers to during the service, there's a process of actually trying to access and receive the service. If you encountered an issue or a problem, did you get the help that you required to resolve that issue or problem in a timely manner? Whereas the time it took to actually get the service, it's like I needed this service at a certain point in time. Did I get it when I needed it? Nova, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So I'll use an example here. For example, if you were applying to get a license, at any point in time during that process of application, you may have required additional information or any sort of help that you needed. That's what the first attribute is referring to, whereas the second attribute is referring to the overall process, how long that entire process took.
Okay, thank you for that. I have another question here, which maybe I'm in a better position to address, and it is, do we know if this approach will result in changes to the common measurements tool as well? It appears that the new approach to the survey has types of questions that would be useful to have in the common measurements tool. And the question to that answer is yes, that is the intent. In fact, the new model was first tested by Valitest Associates in the work we did to develop the municipal common measurements tool. So there was some preliminary testing of the model there. It's now been fully tested through its application and Taking Care of Business 4. And with some minor modifications, it's something that we feel confident in rolling out into our other products. So as Bess indicated, it explains 86% of the variation in client satisfaction. And as I indicated earlier, it allows for much more detailed drill down into understanding where jurisdictions should focus their efforts to improve services. So the next order of business will be to load this the same analytical framework into the next iteration of Citizens First, which was Citizens First 7, that is now in the planning stages, and to also then, once that is in the field, to load it into the Common Measurements tool in a new enhanced version. I have another question here regarding the Client Satisfaction Index. Could you please explain the emotional context, how the emotional context technique works? So the emotional dimension of the service experience is a new lens that's being applied in the analytical model and the client satisfaction model. So Bess and Nova, could you please comment on that?
Sure. So the emotional context, we wanted to have a component of our outcome, our dependent variable, the client satisfaction index. We wanted to have an emotional aspect in it, and that's represented by the question, I felt good about the service experience I had. Bess, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that the emotional, there's the sort of the rational components and the emotional components within the index. The emotional is meant to speak to exactly what Nova was saying. How did it feel? How did it feel during the service experience itself? So it's meant to speak to that emotional side that's often neglected in this type of research.
Okay, thank you. I've got a follow-up to the question related to the elaboration on the issue related to timeliness and access. And the question is framed in the terms, what's the difference between access and getting help in the service experience? They sounded the same, but I think they're two quite different things. Bess, Nova, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, so when you're trying to access a service, you might go through a number of different channels. So that's if you're going, maybe you might need to make a phone call, and you might need to go online, or maybe you need to visit an office. These are all different channels that you might use in your attempts to gain access to the service. Now, going through that process, you might experience an issue or a problem, and that second attribute is intended to speak to the time it takes to get assistance in the resolution of that problem. Nova, do you want to expand?
I think you covered it mostly best. Again, access is referring to the initial process before you get directed to the right channel, whereas any help I needed could occur at any point during the service process.
Does that clarify, or is it?
I think in my books it would clarify it, but hopefully that's also the case for other participants. In fact, it is a better explanation I'm getting on the feedback loop here. You didn't explain getting help correctly the first time, so there you go. Future reference.
Thank you for asking again.
I'm waiting as well for additional questions, and while I do that, perhaps I can loop back to the question related to trust and confidence. This has been in the past a bit of a point of frustration or curiosity for us in the Citizens First and Taking Care of Business studies, because while we've seen satisfaction rising, we've seen reputation scores, and if we can use those as sort of a proxy for trust and confidence, more or less flatlined over the years. And so part of our conundrum has been, well, why is it not that those measures are moving upwards along with satisfaction with service? And part of what we're thinking is maybe the answer is that whereas satisfaction with the service experience can be driven much more by those functional dimensions that are part of the new model, it's the emotional dimension that really drives a sense of trust and confidence. It's not just how efficiently we're able to deliver the service, but the way we connect with and interact with clients at the moment of truth in the service experience that leads them to adopt or engenders a greater level of trust and confidence in the organization that's providing the service, and by extension in the public service. So for the first time, we've included that question as a component, actually, of the Client Satisfaction Index, and we're asking a question as to whether the service experience had an impact on their level of trust and confidence with government, public sector institutions. And so for the first time, we're actually able to measure it, and we do have some metrics for it, starting in TCOB4, and we'll be tracking that going forward. I've got another question here, and we still have a bit of time, so if you have questions, please do send them along. Based on the findings, what do you see as key learnings for frontline staff? What they have control over in the service experience, in brackets, in terms of areas of strong performance or areas to improve? And this is a good question. It's a driver that you didn't address, Bess and Nova, because it was one that was performing reasonably well and didn't have the same urgency to address, but perhaps you can comment on it now.
Sure. So this refers to the Staff Interaction Index. And as Nicholas said, it wasn't as strong a driver, so we didn't address it in the interest of time. But the strongest driver within that index is making clients feel good about the interaction that they're having. So it's speaking to those softer skills rather than simply delivering on the things they require. It's really making them feel good about the experience. As Nicholas was talking to earlier, appealing to the emotional part, or recognizing that there is an emotional component to satisfaction with the service experience. So it's feeling good about the interaction. In addition, it's making them feel like you're making every effort to address their needs. Again, it's the softer side of things. It's not just delivering and meeting their needs, but making them feel like you're making every effort to address their needs, and really understanding their situation is the third.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sorry, Nicholas, just one other thing to add to that. An interesting point. A weaker driver within the Staff Interaction Index was being knowledgeable. So again, that seems more a hard skill, really knowing your stuff. Had less impact on client satisfaction overall than these softer areas that I was just referring to, making people feel good and like you care.
Okay, thank you, Bess. I think that's a good answer, and there's increasingly evidence and literature that talks about the emotional dimension of the service experience. You know, the Harvard Business School has produced a couple of papers, and our colleagues in New Zealand who have licensed our methodology of Citizens First and taking care of business in the studies they've been doing, which they call Kiwis Counts. They found in their last study that clients were more satisfied with a service experience than when they did not receive the product they set out to get, the product or service, but they felt good about the experience. They were more satisfied than those people who received the product but didn't feel good about the interaction. So we're coming to appreciate increasingly that dimension, emotional dimension of the service experience is extremely important to build service. And as I stated earlier, I believe it's going to demonstrate that that's what really builds reputation and trust and confidence. We don't have any new questions coming up on the board here, but maybe I'll toss one out for you, if you don't mind, Bess and Nova, putting you on the spot a bit. This is a national report, so it's aggregating all of the results across the country and the 11 different subscriber jurisdictions. You did make reference in your presentation to this, in some cases, being characteristic of most of the jurisdictions, or there being some exceptions in some cases in the findings that are being presented at the national level. Is there anything more you could give us in terms of insight in the differentiations that you observed across jurisdictions in this study, without naming names?
without naming names, that was the challenge we sort of faced in trying to give some information about jurisdictional differences without sort of naming names. So the common, I guess, what's common to all, almost right across the board, with the exception of, I think, one jurisdiction, the strongest priority was issue resolution. Staff interaction did emerge as a stronger driver for, I believe, it was 5 out of the jurisdictions. It was a somewhat, had more impact. And for those jurisdictions for whom this was the case, you'll recognize yourself. But I guess what's interesting to me is the things that were common across the jurisdictions, the common issues that they experienced, and ease of accessing service. So I think what I'm saying is that I was kind of surprised by what was common among them. And the differences, Nova, did you have any differences that really stood out for you, that it was surprised you?
Across the board, I think the majority of the jurisdictions had similar results, but with respect to things like self-service and red tape, self-service in particular, I noticed that there were 1 or 2 exceptions where the online channel may not have been preferred just based on the different services that are available through the online channel for different jurisdictions, and those will know who they are as well. In terms of the drivers, yeah, I think you covered it best with the majority of the jurisdictions finding issue resolution and delivery timeliness at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you for that response. And our hope is, and I think what we found in the in analyzing the results, producing the reports, that in fact this analytical model does allow for differentiation to a much greater degree across jurisdictions and identifying specific priority areas to focus on to improve service in specific environments. So with that, we don't have any more questions on stream, and it's time for us to wrap up. So that concludes our time for this webinar. Bess and Nova, our thanks to you for an excellent and informative presentation. Our thanks as well to our webinar participants. We hope you found the webinar informative. A reminder that as a registrant, you will receive an electronic copy of the presentation deck, so look for that in your inbox. This webinar will also be posted on the ICCS website for your future use, or for you to refer your colleagues and family friends and neighbors to go and take a look at. Hard copies of the Taking Care of Business 4 report are now available on sale on the ICCS website if you want to get a copy of the full report. If you haven't already signed up for this Thursday's webinar on service delivery issues related to mobile devices and mobile apps, there's still time to do so. That's a presentation by Dr. Jeffrey Roy of Dalhousie University, a study that was commissioned from him by the Public Sector Service Delivery Council and Chief Information Officers Council Research Committee. It will be a very interesting presentation. So again, thank you very much for your attendance, and have a great day.